Hello everyone! I thought it would be a good idea to give you guys a summary of the big how to expose Sigma FP RAWs for each of the RAW flavors. Hence, this video contains the highlights of the big one, giving you a bite-sized guide on the good exposure ranges for each ISO. You don't need to have watched the original video. I'll briefly explain the stuff I found relevant, so you know where the values I'm showing you are coming from and what they mean. Before we dive in though, without going into too much detail, I need to tell you a bit about the noise levels. In the big videos, I've calculated the noise values for the test footage from a selection from the wall next to my subject's face. This produced this table over here. I'm not going to talk about the values here, but what you need to see is the trend. So basically, the images that contain the noise values in red are not considered good images because they have too much noise. The exposure value that gave the noise was the wall exposure, not the original exposure, i.e. face exposure. So here we have a face exposure or an original exposure of 0 EV. So the exposure here is about -2 EV, whereas for this bit here, about -3 EV. The highest exposure value is given by the clipping point, and the lowest exposure value is given by the noise level. I chose the EVs that have a maximum noise level of 3.9. Thus, this column tells us what the minimum exposure level should be for the darkest object in the frame in order for the image to look good, not have a lot of noise. For example, for ISO 400, the darkest object of the frame must have an exposure value of -3.0 or above, -2.0, -1.0, etc. I have a note here for ISO 100 and 200. The lowest EV I measured in these tests is -4.0, but for these two ISOs, the noise levels that correspond to this EV are low, so I reckon you could probably underexpose the image by an extra stop. Let's look at the graph corresponding to the values in the table. Obviously, this is ISO. Now I want to show you the footage that corresponds to the topmost and the bottommost of these values. So for example, for ISO 100, I'm going to show you the image for +2.5 EV and an image that contains an average amount of noise that corresponds to this value. In other words, for the underexposed clips, you'll see the ones with an overall or average acceptable noise level, since because of the way I lit this scene, I have a big range between the face exposure and the darkest object. For the overexposed images, what you're gonna see is the first not clipped image from that particular ISO batch. So for ISO 1600, this is +4.5 EV. If we look at the exposure value that's one f-stop higher than that image, we have clipped bits in that image.